Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nahmadu wa nusalli ala Rasulil Kareem. Respected brothers, viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Real Talk and our last and final segment, talking about real issues. As always, we're live and we're from Bradford, so you can call in, although we may not have time to take your calls in today's discussion. And it's a particularly hot potato as such. With me, as always, is Sir Iqbal Bana, my elder. But more importantly, we've got somebody who's much younger and much prettier in terms of expertise. Is Sophia Bonse, I've got that right, yeah, who is working with Muslims and Muslim women especially in prison. She works through the Khidmat Center and the Council of Mosque. One of the arms that they work in is in prisons and rehabilitation, looking at Muslim women and the issues surrounding criminality, reform, justice, rehabilitation. So more importantly, let's hand over to Sophia before we get too bogged down with pedantics. So Sophia, how's it been and what's going on in terms of the criminal world, and why do Muslim women go to prison? That's the biggest alarming thing.
Assalamu alaikum. I think yeah, it's the first question I get asked. I think some people think that perhaps Muslim women are beyond criminality, or there aren't any Muslim women in prison. 4 years ago, I was asked to do some research into Muslim women in prison to look at what the motivating factors were behind them. So I did a 15-month research in 2 of the local prisons and found actually it's quite a complicated motivating factors for their offending. A lot of women were offending because of very difficult social backgrounds and social issues, and I guess discussions which we as a community are not comfortable with having. So a lot of the women had said they'd been victims of abuse. There'd been issues such as forced marriage. One of the callers identified mental health issues. And unfortunately, as with a lot of offenders across the board, not just Muslim women, one of the key findings of the report was that behind the criminality of women, the majority of time was a male.
What statistically, I mean, we were having a discussion. Iqbal Bhai gave us some stats. Nearly 20% of the Muslim 20% of the Muslim prison population is Muslim.
Yeah.
How many of that would be women?
Of the female estate, I can tell you 6%. 6% of
wow.
the female prison population is Muslim women, so it's slowly increasing, it's creeping. I think one of the issues I have is that we were at a similar stage with men, and Iqbal Bhai can probably tell you this a few decades ago. The last decade has seen a 50% increase in the number of Muslim men in prison. We were at a stage once where we had a smaller number, but we really didn't pay attention and we took our eye off the ball, and then we saw this sudden increase and surge. I think with this project, what we're trying to do is really understand the drivers behind Muslim women offending and try to take ownership of that as a community, so we wouldn't be in a similar situation. So 6% is still equivalent to our population on the outside.
Iqbal Bhai, over to you. I mean, the driver behind that would be majority men behind the women's criminal activity. What are we to do about it? And what?
Well, I mean, obviously, from the evidence that Sophia sort of gathered in her research study, there's some sort of correlation between a woman's position in her community and her family, in the society, and within her own environment, which sometimes is driving her to the state where she's then committing an act of criminality. And I think the question, therefore, is what is the community doing to try and stop that particular environment being created in the first place, that it drives women to do what they're doing. And obviously from Sophia's what she's said, it seems like the majority of the cases is that women are in an abusive situation where they've reached the stage where in order for them to escape, the only option they see is the possible option of taking criminal action against the perpetrator. And I think Muslim women, or like most of the women, I mean in this country, we know for a fact that there's a huge amount of domestic violence going on, and 90% of that is not even reported. So I wonder how much of that is happening within our own community and how women are suffering in silence. So one of the questions is, what are we doing to try and empower women who find themselves in that situation where they're the victims of domestic violence or physical or mental abuse in their homes, who can then go out somewhere and seek some sort of counseling, support and guidance, and try and get themselves out of that dreadful, terrible situation that they find themselves in.
Over to you, Sophia. No pressure, no, and it's a massive, loaded question. But over to you. What would you?
I think Iqbal's is completely right. There is a lot of prevention work that could be done, and I speak about this quite frequently. The fact that if there were hubs, whether that was within a masajid environment, whether that was in a community setting where women who are victims of abuse or women that are experiencing a difficulty within a home setup within their societies or communities can go and openly speak to somebody before that becomes an issue. There's a lot to be done at a prevention level as well. It's very similar with the male situation, but with women it's an absolutely different need, and a lot of times women are victims. Yes, some of them I won't defend and say all offenders are completely innocent. Of course they aren't. There are some who have engaged in criminal behaviour, and they'll be punished, and that's what the system is there for. But unfortunately, there is a backdrop of very complex issues behind these women.
I mean, another loaded question. Previous Justice Minister, and then the one subsequently after, are prisons punishment? What's the government stance? I mean, do you know this? Is it a punishment centre, or is it there to punish, or is it there for rehabilitation purposes? And what's the biggest barrier for Muslim women in rehabilitation?
I think if you look at Muslim women, there's no real culture of Muslim women going to prison. So for any Muslim woman to be taken out of, most probably, from what I see, a lot of Muslim women live within Muslim communities. So for them to go to prison to a largely non-Muslim environment and have to adapt to that is a challenge in itself. I think very often it can be a shock to the system, and I will let you know there's another misconception that Muslim offenders are very young women, and they're not. My client base starts from 18 and it goes all the way up to mid-60s. So they're unfortunately there are not just young women, there's adult women, but grandmothers in there as well who might not speak English as a first language. So the type of support that they require is more so. So as you can tell, that sort of environment would be quite shocking to their system. Learning the prison regime, learning to adapt, having time to reflect. I think when we're comparing Muslim women and Muslim men, it's a very different scenario. Iqbal Bhai is right, there are many in number when it comes to Muslim men, so they automatically seem to have a support system there. Whereas Muslim women, because they're lesser in number, often are in small pockets or in isolation as they're in prisons. Those friendship groups are just not forged. So it's a really lonely journey, and as you both know, there's a lot of stigma attached to a Muslim woman offender. And the majority of the time, families and communities are perhaps not even accepting of that woman to come back to the family home or the community either. So then a lot of women talk to me about a double sentence. So they say, once we've completed our sentence in the prison, there's this fear that we'll have to do a second community sentence, which is we're perhaps not allowed or welcome to go home, even if we do go back to our communities. There's this risk that we'll be identified. We will always be that woman who offended. Whereas, as we've said in the break, for Muslim men, it's very much a badge of honor. He's a lad, he'll recover. Even at visiting times in prisons, I see Muslim men, their families will go and visit them, their mothers, their wives. With Muslim women, it's not often the case. Sometimes children are prohibited from visiting them. Sometimes families won't visit them because there's this double standard about shame and dishonor.
Let me ask you both, and maybe Iqbal Bhai can continue with my question. Some would argue, and some rightly so, would say, hold on, you've done the crime, now do the time. Whether it's somebody else's fault or your fault, or you wanted to do X, Y, and Z, you knew it was wrong, you're grown up, you're an adult, you're mature, you're sane. Why did you do such an activity that led you to do this? And then the whole issue of, hold on, prisons are there, criminals are there to be punished, and why give them such a softly five-star? Some would argue that. I mean, what would you say to that? Iqbal Bhai first, and
well,
then
I think prisoners are there for dual purposes. The first and foremost purpose of a prison is to take away somebody's liberty so they cannot enjoy the fruits of life, and that is a form of punishment. They're locked up in a small cell for 22 hours a day in some cases, and that is their liberty taken away. But the second aspect of the prison is rehabilitation. That the person who's committed the crime, they've been in prison, they've been put away, they've been taken away from the rest of the world, and they've been isolated, and that in that time they have the opportunity to reflect and come out rehabilitated.
Okay, hold that thought, because I want to. I've just been handed a question again, but a caller didn't want to come in there, but saying that prisons, depending on the previous justice minister, were in one sense reform and rehabilitation sentences, but in the other minister's lines or words, quote unquote, can't remember the words, were that they are there to punish. So what do you say to that, Sophia?
I think from the conversations that we're having, that there's no doubt that prisons are there to reform individuals, to give them that space and time to reflect on what they've done. I think as a Muslim community, and sometimes it's disheartening, I find that we have a very unforgiving attitude as well.
Okay.
We have a very unforgiving attitude in that,
okay.
You know, I often say this to people who say, you know, you work with Muslim women in prison, and it's quite upsetting that some people have said, well, you're just as bad as them for working with them. And I say, brother, why do we pray namaz 5 times a day? We pray to seek the forgiveness of Allah Ta'ala. Yet on the same note, we can't forgive another human, and their forgiveness and them having to prove themselves, it's not with us. You know, they must find that and seek solace with the Lord, and that's not for us.
Fantastic.
You know?
Sorry to cut both of you. We do have another caller on the line. So let's go towards our caller. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam. I just wanted to say that I think the work that the sister is doing is very, very important. I don't have any questions. I just wanted to praise her for all the positivity that she's sending out. I think it's a very important issue that needs to be addressed. And like the sister said, it's sometimes very easy to point fingers and judge, especially with the type of sensitive work that she's doing. But I just wanted to say well done to everyone involved.
Thank you very much for your call. And okay, there you go. You got a fan, Sophia. And it's not as if we're not fans or nobody's against you or everybody's against us. It's about getting the right fine balance and doing the right thing and helping somebody in need, and whether it's somebody who's done something wrong and getting them back on their 2 feet, or reforming and rehabilitation. And coming to that is my next question on reform and rehabilitation, and how you are tackling this in your grassroots and as your job.
I think initially, as I said, I started off, and I've never worked in the criminal justice system. 4 years ago when I started, I've done a lot of work with women, I've done a lot of work with communities, and I was qualified in sort of behavioural science and research. So it was a challenge that was set to me, and I often think that these challenges come from Allah Ta'ala, and we must see them as that. Having written the report, I then didn't really see anybody within our communities who was able to move forward the recommendations of the report, which is, alhamdulillah, we have a very robust community sector. We have a very robust Islamic institutes and setup.
Indeed.
They're very rich, and I saw, as well as the organisations, Khidmat Centres and Council for Mosque, saw a potential where we could rehabilitate Muslim women through our setups. So again, that meant winning on board the trust of the prisons, but also as sisters coming through the prisons who are coming back to the Yorkshire area, helping them to seek housing, assistance with finances and accessing them, sometimes relocating because they're not welcome back where they are, but also offering practical opportunities such as placements at our delivery centres, so placements in administration duties. We have a number of services that we have, whether that's working with young people with disabilities, whether that's working with elderly, as long as their crime was not connected to that.
Iqbal Bhai, coming back to you, I mean, all these challenges, and with you with so many hats that you wear and experiences, what would you advise voluntary community sector organizations, especially Muslim, and how would you support the work Sophie is doing?
I mean, first of all, can I say, you know, I've admired Sophie's report when it came out. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it to the launch when Brother Ishtiaq, you know, kindly invited me. And secondly, I think this piece of work that she's doing, as the sister said in her phone call, is something that we should be really proud of, and something that we as a community should be supporting. And I take my hat off to the Khidmat Centre and to Ishtiaq and Brother Segal and others for actually taking on this challenge, because it is a challenge. You know, one of the factors that I mentioned earlier was that domestic violence is an issue that, again, we've swept under the carpet. So this is something that we need, and prevention, because if you take what Sophie's told us, I would assume from what she said that the majority of the people who are engaged in this, in committing an act of criminality, do so not because they're criminals, but because they find themselves in a situation where they see there's no other choice for them. So they do things which then makes them into criminals.
A choice, a big mistake of a choice that they've got to pay.
Exactly, and therefore the issue is going back before that, and that is the counselling services are not in place. The support structures are not in place where any woman or any man who finds himself in that situation where they're completely fed up of life as it is treating them, they can go and seek and talk to somebody.
Yeah, and I think it's very much about us reclaiming our communities.
Right.
In a past life, I used to manage a youth work project, and I'm very concerned about the number of young people going to prison.
Wow.
I think we need to come together as a sector. That's a community sector, and I have to put out there as well at this point, even the Muslim charity sector as well. Brother Iqbal was right. We're very under-resourced as a sector. Generally, austerity affects everybody, but I think we need to start concentrating on some of the homegrown issues, and criminality is a massive issue. And until we don't reclaim that, until we don't put this into perspective, really our young people and our community will continue to lose out, and it'll further add to the stigma.
Thank you very, very much, and hats off to you. And I can't take my hat off, Iqbal Bhai, although you can't metaphorically, but however, hats off to you, Sophia, and hats off to the Khidmat Centre, and thank you both for coming, especially you, Sophia, is a regular, but you, thank you very much for taking time out from your busy schedule. And it's fantastic, amazing. Let's hope and let's pray, more importantly, do this, that we can come together, unite and reform and help those in need, whether it's here, whether it's in Yorkshire, in Bradford, or around the country. It's been fantastic having you, but I think this itself, we must have you back in the near future and talk about some of the finer, more sort of detailed issues in terms of crime, criminality. What I'm sure people will do that, and people will pose questions. We have had a lot of questions coming in. Unfortunately, we couldn't address them because we've just got around in terms of getting our head around the facts, and those are amazing and alarming. So again, thank you very much from IQRA, and hope to see you very shortly. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much.
Jazakallah everybody at home for watching. Hope to see you next week at the same time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.